The Ballad of Johnny Arcane by Jim Nail, read to you by Jim Nail. Chapter 15. Ladyland, Part 1. Under the platform at the back of the wagon, a compartment, boarded with slats of wood perched directly over the rear axle. It was packed with costumes, fur-lined robes, crazy quilted with patches of color, deep purples, sky blue, and vernal green, belts and sashes and fringed jackets, leather hats with plumed feathers. Into this crammed space Johnny was forced to climb, while Mars nailed the slats back in place. Johnny's knees struck something solid. Along the rear wall he found an array of glass apothecaries, each packed with a dark green herb. "You find that, Clearlight?" came Mars's voice. "In the jars? That's what you call the illumination. Chew on some. It'll keep you quiet." The wagon began to move. The road was pitted and the axles rocked from side to side, but the clothing cushioned him. He considered Mars's offering of the illumination, but decided against it. He must remain clear-headed at this time. Anything could happen. Perhaps he fell asleep. Suddenly, he heard voices, lots of them, a large crowd of people, mumbling, shouting, and singing just outside in what sounded like many different languages. The wagon itself was not moving. He realized he'd gotten himself into a position with one arm above his head, the other folded under his belly, and he couldn't move either one. Panic seized him. The thought of being contained like this any longer was unbearable. But no, he must stay calm. He focused on the sounds. "7, 7, 7, 7, somebody shouted over and over. And then it sounded like someone said, "Don't step on the snake." There was a rattling sound like dice in a cup, but more rhythmic, and it seemed to recede and advance rhythmically. In the distance, women's voices chanted gutturally on 4 notes. "Prawakasi, prawakisa." Then a voice like a child's threaded through, intoning, "Bizo, Bizo, Bizo." "Mr. Mars, you bring any weed?" Johnny felt the wagon lurch, and he realized someone had stepped on board. "Just a little, Sir Duke. Enough for my friends. I didn't renew my license." "These knives look pretty sharp. I might want to caliber them." "Caliber away, boss. I got nothing to hide." It's okay. You're regular. Your papers are in order. Pass on. But stay out of Ladyland this time, okay? That got a little ugly." "Yes, sir." The wagon began to move again. Johnny centered his breathing and tried to bring his focus to his arms. The arm under him was numb. Slowly, he managed to roll himself onto his back, and the numb arm flopped free and began to tingle. With great effort, he brought the other arm down until they were both resting at his sides. They rattled on through a cavalcade of sounds and smells, intoxicating smells of food cooking, repulsive smells of rotting flesh and singeing hair. Sometimes there was music, mostly percussion, and the rattling of dissonant bells. They passed through an argument, many men yelling at each other. He made out a few words. "Castration!" somebody yelled. "Denominator!" cried another. Then there was a woman's voice screaming, not near, but relentless. "Help me!" she cried. No one responded. She continued to scream. After a while, it grew a little quieter. Most of the voices gave in to a low, throbbing hum that rose and fell in pitch. Occasionally, there was a crackling noise like twigs breaking, but it seemed to come from high in the air. For a while, Johnny heard the hoof-clopping of another pony alongside the wagon and a voice. He couldn't make out the words, but he understood Mars Daniels' reply. Yeah, I got lots. It's good, but I have to raise the price. No, I can't give it to you here. My license expired. You ride on ahead and meet me at Ladyland. After that, the sounds returned, especially the sounds of traffic on the road, the rattling of carriages, and the whizzing of other moving things. From his confinement, Johnny could only guess what they looked like. For a long time, there was the mechanical clanging and the hissing of venting steam. Then the wagon stopped, and there were voices, men speaking rapidly in a foreign tongue. The floorboards rocked, and the voices grew more aggressive. Johnny felt the clunk of footsteps, and then the metallic cling of a knife being pulled from a sheath. "Shuck off, you lousy horned pigs," barked Mars Daniels' distinctive voice. Then a slice through the air and a sharp yell of pain. The other voices roiled, shouting something like, "Kanima! Kanima!" The wagon pitched wildly as the intruders departed. Johnny felt pressure as Mars flopped down on the platform above him. "Bees'll me to death, Mother. Dreamweavers can't even be alone with their thoughts anymore." There was a knock on the wood. "Clearlight, you okay in there?" Johnny stirred. "Yes. Are you going to let me out of here?" In time. But there's an important lesson for you in this. Can you hear me?" "I can hear you." "Well, let me make it a little easier for you to hear me." The floor teetered, and then there was a screeching sound as Mars pried some of the slats loose. The garments rustled, and Johnny could see his face peering in at him. "This is the lesson, Clearlight. In this place we're going, you gotta choose your battles. You sus? You try to fight them all, you'd be dead in less than a day. Now, you and me, we only got one battle to fight. We're gonna save your Lucy, that's all. Everything else, you let it go. You sus?" Johnny didn't say anything. "You sus?" Mars repeated. Still, Johnny didn't say anything. He was too overwhelmed to put his thoughts into words. "Well, just think on it then, Clearlight. We'll be there soon." He left the slats open and the fabric parted. Johnny could see his back as he sat on the buckboard and goaded the pony. He was wearing a fringe buckskin jacket, and he had a bright purple scarf tied around his black cloud of hair. But he blocked most of Johnny's view of the road ahead. There were no trees or bushes or foliage of any kind. Mostly it looked like structures, walls, and fences right up to the roadbed. Signs everywhere, none of which he could read. Windows occasionally, people leaning out of them. Someone threw something at the wagon from a window. It splattered against the canvas. Johnny caught the scent of rotten fruit, but he couldn't see what it was. Eventually it grew dark. Well, good, he thought to himself. At least there's a constant. Then suddenly the wagon stopped. "We're here, Clearlight. Get yourself out of there." Johnny emerged from his confinement like a moth from a cocoon. His arms felt so light they kept trying to float, and it was all he could do to keep them at his sides. Mars was holding a dark, round loaf of unsliced bread. He broke off a crust. "Here, eat this. You're hungry." Johnny did. He stuffed the crust into his mouth and quickly swallowed the tumbler of water that followed. "Okay, this is what I want you to do. Take this bread in your hands and step out. That's all. Do what I say." Johnny took the bread. His thoughts were too clouded to object to anything. "This is the way out." Mars parted the canvas flap. Clutching the loaf, Johnny stepped down from the wagon. It was dark, but not the dark of night. It was more the shaded dark of a deep, narrow canyon in late afternoon. The walls were unlike any he had ever seen. Perfectly vertical and only wide enough for the road to pass between them, and they were interlaced with a tangle of protuberances so foreign it took him a long time to conceptualize what they might be. His first awakening was a memory. The silo at King Corn with its handholds and hatches, and yes, there were pictures on these walls too, but not of graceful birds and mountains. They were odd runes and symbols blackened by torches, stick figures and geometric patterns. Rails and ladders and metal bars clung to the walls, and further up, fenced ledges and glass windows, many broken. These canyons were made by the hands of man. It was only then that he realized there were people high above him, sitting in chairs on ledges or leaning on railings. Were they real? They were so motionless. Were they dead people propped up to look like they were alive? Or frozen in a place where they had perished? The questions were answered by a hacking sound, and one person on a balcony far above spat into the air. His spittle arched in a stray shaft of sunlight, split into 3 portions, then into a fine mist infused by the accelerating momentum of its descent. Johnny felt its moisture strike his forehead. Suddenly, someone stood before him. A child, a small boy, barefoot, dressed in rags, his face smeared with mud, his eyes entreated. He spoke. "Give me some of that bread." Johnny understood hunger. His heart went out. He ripped a generous handful from the crust and thrust it to the boy. A shimmering in the air, a rustling in the street, and then, out of the cracks and corners of the canyon, children poured out like cockroaches. Little boys and girls, all equally ragged and barefooted. They surrounded Johnny and pressed in on him, yelling and clawing and grasping. One of them snatched the bread from his hands, and the other descended upon it, and others descended upon it, tearing it with fingers, ripping it into shreds, thrusting the crumbs into their mouths, all the while howling and shoving. Johnny felt a firm hand grasp his shoulder and pull him back. He turned. Mars Daniel took both his arms and thrust him through the upraised flap back into the shelter of the wagon. Johnny stumbled onto the floor, his heart pounding as Mars closed the flap. Object lesson number 1, Clearlight. You'll learn soon. You have to pick your battles.
Johnny Arcane told the truth, or else he held his tongue. But he was rarely prone to please, for honesty is not an easy thing in